Module 1, Foundation Knowledge. Welcome to the first module in this educational series. In this and subsequent modules, we will look to provide the knowledge and skills that will help those responsible for recruiting, retaining, and managing blood donors to do so more effectively. Here, we will cover foundation knowledge, the aim to equip you with some basic information about blood and how a hospital blood bank or transfusion service works. Such understanding will help you educate or respond to queries from the donor public on aspects of donation, the way their donated blood will be handled, and who it might help and how. What we will be describing are common elements and practices usually observed in most blood establishments. It could be that your hospital or service may not have computers to manage your donor data or may lack component preparation laboratories. But it is likely that you are or will soon be working towards achieving these things, so they are discussed here. There are 6 main learning objectives, and the rest of this module will address each of these. As we go through each slide, make certain you relate the content to your own experiences. At the end of the module, you may want to revisit this slide and reflect on your new understanding. Blood is the body fluid that delivers necessary substances such as nutrients and oxygen to the cells and transports metabolic waste products away from those same cells for disposal in the appropriate organs of the body. Severe blood loss compromises the proper functioning of tissues and organs and may lead to death. Transfusion medicine is a science of its own. There are words and expressions that you need to be familiar with, as these are in common use among your colleagues. Those listed here are only examples. There will be more you will come across in later modules. Here are some additional examples. Always ask colleagues for clarification on any terms or acronyms they use that you do not understand. Antigens and antibodies play a crucial role and are the basis of blood typing methods. Manufacturers produce specific human antisera and red cell suspensions, especially harvested from blood donations, for use in the laboratory to determine ABO and Rhesus blood types or other blood groups. Voluntary non-remunerated blood donation is the WHO gold standard. In resource-limited settings, paid donors pose a very high risk for transfusion-associated infections because they will not readily disclose their health status or risk behavior. While some studies have shown family replacement donors to be as safe as volunteer first-time donors, there is a concern that a replacement donor may, because of family pressure, perhaps not self-defer, even if they believe donation presents a risk to themselves or the patient. They are not as safe as regular repeat donors. Replacement donation may help meet basic blood needs, but as healthcare systems develop, it is not sustainable to rely on replacement donors, and most countries aspire to 100% voluntary donations. When thinking about remuneration, remember, this is not just about money. It can include time off work, other than that reasonably needed for the donation, and travel. However, small tokens, refreshments, and reimbursements of direct travel costs are compatible with voluntary non-remunerated donation. Blood maintains its red color because of the red cells. However, blood is made up of different cells and proteins. This slide shows some of the common components of the blood that may be separated by the blood service. White cells are not normally separated for transfusion, except in fairly sophisticated settings. During the preparation of platelets for transfusion, white cells are part of the yield, the buffy coat. They may be wasted in order to have platelets as concentrated as possible. Despite improvement in technology over the years, the red cells are only viable for a maximum of 42 days when stored at a temperature between +2 to +6 degrees Celsius in the blood bank refrigerator. Platelets have an even shorter lifespan, typically less than a week. Regardless, there is evidence that newer blood is better for patients. These are reasons why donors and donations are required every day in order to replenish stock. The type or configuration and quality of blood storage bags differ according to the manufacturer. The equipment used to process the blood bags also differs according to the type of blood bag. The hospital blood bank or transfusion service must plan its needs accordingly and acquire the right type of bags, procure the necessary equipment, and train the staff accordingly in the correct processes. This figure shows some of the types of blood packs available on the market. When selecting a blood bag, it is important to assess the needle and the quality of the plastic for durability during processing. Needles of cheaper bags may cause discomfort for the donor and discourage repeat donation, making any cost saving a false economy. The quality department, donor clinic, and laboratory all work together to evaluate the blood bags and recommend the ideal bag for procurement. In a hospital blood bank and in transfusion services, different types of blood bags may be used because of different needs of the clinicians. Whole blood is transported in specially designed transport boxes from the donor clinic to the laboratory. The cooler boxes have a special coolant to maintain the desired temperature according to the component to be produced. A thermometer inside the box records the temperature in transit. On arrival at the destination, the temperature is checked, and if within the recommended limits, the blood is then processed or used. The transport box is validated for the transportation of blood from a mobile blood collection site to the laboratory. Special coolants maintain temperatures at +20 to +24 degrees Celsius or +2 to +10 degrees Celsius, depending on what products the blood establishment wishes to prepare. There are various sizes of these boxes, as there is for blood bank refrigerators and plasma freezers. Design depends on the volumes of whole blood or components to be transported or stored. In what is known as cold chain management, a blood establishment should procure equipment with temperature monitoring devices and alarm systems to warn when the temperature of whole blood or components is out of the acceptable range. Routine blood donation has been in existence for many decades and continues to save millions of lives around the world. There is no technology available yet to produce a blood substitute, and therefore, when needed, blood has to be donated. In order to reduce the need for blood transfusion with its attendant risks, doctors may prescribe iron tablets or folates in order to boost the production of red cells. Iron and folate are key ingredients required for red cell formation. However, this is only practical for patients who do not have severe blood loss and therefore have time to produce the needed red cells. Blood groups are inherited characteristics. There have been many new blood groups discovered over the last 100 years, such as the Duffy, Cal, and Kidd systems, making over 30 in total. The first to be discovered and the most well-known are the ABO and Rhesus blood groups. The blood group of the donor and the potential recipient need to be determined by cross-matching before transfusion takes place to prevent a possibly fatal hemolytic reaction. This simple table shows the respective red cell antigens and antibodies associated with each ABO blood group as discussed in the last slide. The laboratory has the responsibility to determine the ABO and Rhesus blood group of each donor using a small sample of the donated blood. The process requires trained laboratory staff certified to conduct the test. In some cases, transfusion services may want to determine the blood group of the potential donor before they donate blood. This is sometimes important if one has too much of one type of blood group in the bank. Pre-donation blood grouping is an attempt to avoid waste by not collecting blood that may not be used. Because people are often curious about their blood type, this approach can be deployed as a public engagement tool. There are variations in the prevalence of ABO blood groups among different populations and racial cohorts. It is therefore important to collect blood donations from people of different ethnic backgrounds because there may arise a need for a less common blood type for a patient from a minority racial group. In fact, It is commonly a practice of blood banks and transfusion services to register donors from these less common blood groups so that they may be called in emergency to donate blood for somebody with a similarly rare blood group. Since Group O blood may be given anybody, it therefore follows that wherever possible, blood establishments should offer for transfusion blood that matches the ABO group of the recipient. That way, Group O blood is reserved for genuine Group O recipient patients. Group AB is fairly rare in all populations, and in general, blood establishments have adequate stocks of these blood types. It follows that there is need to control the number of AB blood donors in order not to overstock this type. Group O Rhesus negative blood is extremely important as it can be generally given to any patient, whether Rhesus positive or negative, especially in emergencies. Mothers who are Rhesus negative, irrespective of the ABO blood group, may develop antibodies against Rhesus positive red cells, leading to destruction of the baby's red cells in utero or when newborn. This is a condition called hemolytic disease of the newborn, HDN. HDN may be fatal unless O Rhesus negative blood is transfused to the fetus or newborn in order to reduce the anemia resulting from the red cell destruction. The idea of a bank for blood comes historically from the normal money bank understood by all. People deposit money in the bank in order to take it out for use when the need arises. With a blood bank, however, instead of being stored for personal use, the blood becomes a resource for the community. A common donor motivation is to give so that blood will be there if I ever need it. While not likely to ever be literally true, blood donation is one of the finest examples of collective support within a community. Hospital blood banks are often part and parcel of the clinical laboratory of the hospital. Staff rotate between the different laboratories and provide 24-hour cover for all emergencies. Families of patients who require blood transfusion may be asked to donate blood for their relative. The blood is donated to the blood bank, who will replace it with another that is compatible with the patient. Hence the term, family replacement donor. However, there is a risk that if the family has nobody suitable to donate, they may be tempted to approach a paid donor to offer his or her blood instead. The risk of transfusion-associated infections increases dramatically with paid blood donors. The bigger blood establishments rely almost entirely on voluntary non-remunerated blood donors who are not paid in any form. That is, altruistic blood donors. WHO, IFRCS, and other international organizations strongly recommend countries establish nationally coordinated blood transfusion services based on voluntary donation. The principal advantage is that access to safe, quality-assured blood and blood components is significantly improved throughout the country because all facilities operate according to set national standards. The ISBT Code of Ethics for Blood Transfusion has been adopted internationally following consultations with members and local transfusion services and societies. The code addresses the management of blood donors and recipients of blood for transfusion and institutional responsibility for the blood service. The code was last updated in 2017, and learners should source this document to get the latest information. However, the key issues in the version remain the same. Section 3 lays emphasis on the informed consent by the donor to donate the blood. This means the donor has adequate knowledge of the potential risks to her or himself from the donation process. Also required is a declaration that an individual's health status does not pose any risk to the recipient of his or her blood. This exercise is captured in the donor questionnaire and personal declaration. Every donor must respond to each question on the form each time they donate and sign as being truthful. The donor is also interviewed to verify what they have stated on the form and to check they have understood the questions posed. Anonymity between the donor and potential recipient is assured because the donated blood bag does not record any donor details such as name, age, or location. Instead, each donation is given a unique alphanumeric number. ISBT 128 is the most common standard, which will link all tests and components prepared from the donation. The laboratory processes the donated blood and posts the results of the laboratory tests against the respective donation number. Only the donor clinic manager is eventually able to relate the test result to the actual donor for purposes of asking the donor to come again to donate or inviting him or her for post-donation counseling. Staff who conduct the assessment of potential blood donors must be well trained and qualified to do the work. It is a highly responsible job, as the objective is to secure a safe donation that will help save a life and not put the recipient of the blood at risk from transfusion-associated infections. The staff will follow laid-down procedures for the assessment of the potential donor, as well as ensure aseptic procedures in the blood collection process. Patients are under the clinical management of their doctors, who determine and prescribe the blood or blood component required, as well as the quantity. Clinicians prescribe the donated blood on the basis of genuine need. However, it is incumbent on the clinician to fully explain the benefits and risks associated with the transfusion and obtain informed consent for the blood transfusion. For religious reasons, some patients do not accept blood transfusion, and this decision should be respected, even if it is clear the life of the patient will be at risk. All national health authorities are expected to abide by the Code of Ethics and to ensure their staff also comply with the code wherever possible, within the limitations of the resources available. The code is reviewed from time to time as the operating environment changes, but these basic issues remain. The primary exception not covered is autologous blood donation. Clinicians may recommend, or the potential patient going for elective surgery may prefer donating blood for themselves in advance of the surgery. This is to be respected and facilitated within the limits of the resources available. International guidelines on autologous donations are available. A hospital blood bank or transfusion service subscribes to the national health policies because it is part and parcel of the national health system, even though it may run as a private or non-profit entity. Blood donor clinical assessment, evaluation of risk behavior, phlebotomy or blood collection, and the subsequent laboratory tests are all clinical services as they relate to the health of a person. Naturally, the entire process shall be consistent with the approved health policies and procedures. For example, the age of consent to donate is generally directly related to the broader age of consent recognized by the health authorities. It is incumbent upon the blood establishment to ensure compliance with these policies. The Ministry of Health may have in place its own national quality policy to ensure all departments work towards establishing an appropriate quality management system based on defined standards of work. In the case of blood transfusion, the service may select standards such as the Africa Standards for Blood Transfusion as those against which they should be accredited. The standards will define all the quality principles with which the facility needs to comply. The number of departments or units within the transfusion service will vary according to the volume and activities undertaken. The list shown here identifies the key departments or units within each department. There may be sub-departments. For example, under administration, there may be finance, human resources, and procurement sections. The following slides aim to give the basic functions of each of these departments within the transfusion service. The primary objective of the administration unit is to coordinate all the departments to meet the goal of providing safe and adequate blood to those in need in a quality-assured and cost-effective system. Together, the respective heads make up the management unit of the blood bank or transfusion service. This management team is accountable to the hospital management in the case of a hospital blood bank or to the Ministry of Health in the case of a transfusion service. Quality is a responsibility of all staff and needs to be taken seriously in order to make sure processes are carried out to the required standards. This ensures that all components produced meet approved criteria in terms of safety and potency, and therefore usefulness to the blood recipient. The quality representative is responsible to the head of the blood bank or transfusion service for ensuring quality in all processes and procedures. Without blood donors, the blood bank or transfusion service would not exist. The recruitment department, therefore, provides a clinical service, as its primary role is to manage the donor recruitment campaigns in order to increase the number of donors who regularly donate blood. It has staff who have unique skills, enabling them to communicate effectively with the public and change attitudes and behavior, encouraging individuals to donate blood voluntarily without remuneration in any form. By influencing other units, donor needs can be better served, for example, by ensuring friendly opening hours and excellent customer service. The donor clinic's responsibility is one-to-one screening of potential blood donors to detect any risk from donating blood, while also guarding against possible transfusion-associated infections. Hemoglobin levels are assessed, blood pressure may be taken, and only donors with low-risk behavior are accepted. The second responsibility is to safely collect the blood from the donor, following the approved standard operating procedures, and then to correctly label and store donation bags and samples. Finally, staff should be mindful that they are frontline representatives and all their interactions with donors will influence the likelihood of return. This picture shows blood donors at a mobile blood donor clinic. Note the style of the donor chairs designed to provide comfort for the donor. Mobile blood collection units visit schools, shopping malls, business premises, and community halls in order to provide opportunities for the public to donate blood. In most countries, mobile clinics provide the majority of blood collected. Laboratory services are an essential department of any blood bank or transfusion service. In a transfusion service, the donated blood must be grouped and screened for transfusion-associated infections in order to prevent transmission of an infection from a donor to the recipient patient. Blood may also be separated into components here. As mentioned, laboratory services include determination of the blood type of the donated blood. This is done to ensure a recipient will not adversely react to it. The most common blood grouping undertaken is the ABO and Rhesus typing, as discussed earlier. Services that are well-resourced may acquire automated equipment that enables the blood typing to be done with minimal handling of samples. The software in use on such equipment will be able to automatically assign the correct blood type for each sample. The information is also kept in the database so that all components are correctly labeled as well as reflected in the donor's records. This image shows the antigens and antibodies associated with each ABO blood group. You may want to pause the video at this point to study this in more detail. Here, you can see a simple blood typing technique using antisera or antibody reagents so that you can better understand the principles at work. The agglutination depicts the antigen-antibody reaction that is noticeable to the naked eye and from which the interpretation of the ABO-RH group can be made. Here are some examples for you to practice. Please identify the blood group indicated by the reactions. Answers will be given on the next slide, so you may wish to pause the video and note down your interpretations. If you identified any incorrectly, we suggest you rewind the video and practice again until your interpretation is 100% accurate. The blood of the donor poses a risk of transfusion-transmitted infection to a recipient, and therefore, all donated blood should be screened for specific transfusion-associated infections. The technology for screening donated blood has changed over the years, with accuracy above 99% sensitivity for most tests available. The higher the sensitivity of a screening test, the lower the risk for missing an infection in the blood screened, although may produce more false positives. The types of screening tests and the technology depend to a large degree on the resources available. However, even the most manual systems have very highly sensitive tests to ensure blood safety at any facility. The picture is of a typical laboratory bench and shows the technical staff conducting manual tests. Technical staff are specialists in conducting ABO and Rhesus typing as well as compatibility testing. Others specialize in conducting tests for transfusion-associated infections. Depending on the volume of donors and resources available, some institutions have whole blood centrifuges for separating red cells from plasma and platelets from plasma. Some resource-limited hospital blood banks may only be able to separate plasma from red cells by manual means using gravity. From a recruiter perspective, being able to tell a potential donor that by donating, they are going to save 2 or 3 lives rather than just one helps build donor motivation. This picture shows technical staff separating the plasma and platelets from the whole blood after centrifugation. The whole blood and components have been weighed, and those not meeting the minimum weight are discarded. The technical staff also assesses the blood packs for evidence of blood clots or unusual color, and those identified are discarded. This process may be done before laboratory tests are conducted. Despite national differences in terms of the health of the population, the criteria to determine suitability of a person to donate blood is fairly uniform, apart from a variation in weight. In some populations, the average weight is low, and this means that the total blood volume of an individual is also low. In some parts of Asia, for example, only 350 milliliters of blood are collected per donation. Yet, in most countries of the world, around 450 milliliters is the standard volume collected for a regular donation. Discussion here and in the following slides is necessarily general. Please familiarize yourself with the criteria used in your own country. A regular donation of around 450 milliliters of whole blood represents about 8% of the average adult's blood volume. The body replaces this volume within 24 to 48 hours and replenishes red blood cells in 10 to 12 weeks. Women will sometimes be asked to give less frequently than men to guard against iron depletion. Every blood bank or transfusion service should aim to recruit regular rather than one-time blood donors. Regular donors are the safest because they are continuously reminded about the importance of low-risk behavior as well as a healthy living style, and besides, are regularly tested. The hospital blood bank or transfusion service aims to put in place appropriate strategies for blood donor retention. A good experience during the donation process, from interview to post-donation care, encourages a donor to return and donate blood. Every blood bank or transfusion service needs to have staff well trained in the approved procedures for handling blood donors from start to finish of the process. Blood transfusion is generally regarded as a life-saving intervention. The common needs for transfusion are important to understand as they help educate and inform potential blood donors as to why blood is needed. These needs vary to some degree according to the health situation in the country. For example, in a developing country, transfusion is often directed to support women and children, whereas in developed countries, the demand for blood is more associated with conditions prevalent in later life. Thus, in Europe and the United States, the profile of transfused patients will be considerably older. In resource-limited countries, especially in the tropical regions, malaria infection is a major indicator for blood transfusion. Over 60% of blood transfusions are given to children under 5 years of age suffering from malaria, as well as to mothers following complications during or after pregnancy. Cancer and its treatment, known as oncology, relies heavily on blood transfusion, as the treatment regimes may decimate red cells as well as platelets and white cells. Patients will need these components replaced if they are to survive treatment. As oncology becomes more mainstream in low and middle income countries, a reliance on family replacement donation becomes less sustainable and more volunteer donors are required. The issue may arise during pre-donation talks as to why recipients or relatives have to pay for blood that is freely donated. A good example to share in this situation is that of water. Water is freely available in the rivers for one to drink or use. However, to get it from the river to the tap in the kitchen or bathroom requires the engineers to design and build the dam, lay the pipes for the water flow system, and buy the chemicals that purify the water. That is why we pay the city council money for water coming into our taps at home, and blood needs to be paid for the same reason. Communication with colleagues is very important. The success of the blood bank or transfusion service in achieving its mission depends on teamwork, and as a member of the institution, one has a responsibility to engage as a member of the team. Regular staff meetings and training help strengthen knowledge and should be encouraged, both within a department and between departments. Poor teamwork is unlikely to serve either the blood donor or the patient well. Please use these prompts to help you reflect on what you have learned. In Module 2, we will look in more detail at donors and donation.